Hello and welcome to Counterpressed on The Ringer and Spotify. I'm in the studio with Gilly, Flaherty and Jessy Humphreys. On today's show, Manchester City go 9 points clear at the top of the WSL after Chelsea lose to Arsenal. Is the title race over? We'll talk about that and some big movements at the bottom of the table because there were big wins for Liverpool and West Ham and yet another defeat for Everton. Guys, a very big weekend. How did everyone enjoy Stamford Bridge? Jessy, of course, did not. Jill, did you have a good time? I saw you. We met around the Stamford Bridge breakfast buffet.
Yeah, that's the highlight of the day for me, was the breakfast brunch, which was beautiful. And do you know what, right? We went up to the gantry and I just feel like whenever I go to Stamford Bridge, like I'm ready to go on a night out. Like, I really think
because the DJ
was like, I love it. I love the tunes that he plays, but it was yeah, I really enjoyed it. Obviously, I am a neutral in these games. Like, even though playing for both, I wanted a decent game and goals. So it was a good game.
Yeah, I'm always like that as well. I just want as much drama and entertainment as possible. The song that the DJ, I don't think it was our fave DJ Tony. I think it was just their sort of standard in-house DJ. But the Stamford Bridge DJ loves just before kickoff doing the Rihanna, We Found Love in a Hopeless Place. That's their sort of go-to. And then the PA announcers always do the ooh in the wrong time. And that does rattle me a little bit. But they're doing their best. And I agree with you. I think it does get the atmosphere going. And because we had such a packed away end and a pretty decent turnout at Stamford Bridge, I do think the atmosphere in general was very good. It wasn't just sometimes what you get at some of these games where it's busy, but there's not a lot of chanting or noise. It's just sort of like light chat. I felt like we got a lot of chants and back and forth and songs, and I think that added to what was a really entertaining derby. Jessy, I know it wouldn't have been for you so much, but I do think you kind of go over it quite quickly in the press box. You weren't that rattled, I'd say, afterwards.
Yeah, I mean, I think obviously when you're writing a piece, you kind of have to just like leave it. I feel like if I'd been in the ground or like crowd, I'd have been rattled more. And also it was like one of those weird ones where, because Arsenal score the second so soon after the first, and then there's like half an hour to go, you kind of just end up accepting the result. Do you ever get that? Like sometimes where it's just like, you've almost like got the processing time within the game. Sometimes I feel like, oh, well, this has like happened now. I had my moments of rattle though. Someone rattled me later in the evening. Actually, she rattled me at the time and I got re-rattled later in the evening. So.
Well, we will discuss that in Counterpress Behind the Scenes. Wow, I can't wait to hear about that. Okay, let's get stuck into it then, because loads to talk about. Let's talk about Chelsea 0, Arsenal 2 after this. So it was the big ticket game of the weekend, London derby, always one of the best games of the season. And Arsenal pull off their first win at Chelsea in the league since 2018, their first WSL win against Chelsea since December 2023, and a first win over Chelsea since the 24 League Cup final. So it'd been a while for Arsenal to get this result. 2 goals in the second half were enough to do it. Beth Mead, great finish, and then Mariona Caldente having the second. Let's start with Arsenal's performance, Jill, because they needed this. They really needed this. I mean, I talked on Thursday's pod about how important the pride element was going to be coming into this, even though obviously where the table is, they still need to secure Champions League football and make sure they do that. But it felt like they really needed to deliver a good performance. And obviously winning really does that for them in terms of giving something for the fans, because it felt like this season was starting to drift a little bit. A really good performance and a result they desperately needed.
Yeah, and I mean, obviously I covered Wednesday night's game against Man United, and I went into work the next day and there's a couple of Arsenal women fans in there, the teachers, and I said, I feel nervous for you for Saturday because of the fact of that Arsenal just in that game against United, they just lacked conviction. And I always worry about Arsenal, I think, in the top games, as I just feel like you don't know what Arsenal's going to turn up. But I think in that first half, like, I was just watching, obviously, the way they started with Beth Mead's position as well. I think it caused a lot of problems for Erin Cuthbert and Millie Bright because she wasn't naturally playing wide on the right. She was obviously tucking inside. And I think they struggled dealing with that. And I felt like as well with Renee, with the team she started, obviously there's all this talk about can Russo and Blackstenius play together. But when you looked at her bench, it's sort of like, this is like last chance saloon. We have to sort of win this game before I can bring subs on to sort of change it, because you're looking at the difference in the benches. Obviously, Arsenal's was naturally very more defensive, and I mean, obviously, they realistically going forward, they only really had Pullover in regards to the attacking side of things. So there was a bit of that nervousness then of like, what happens if Arsenal don't manage to get the win? Who really are they going to look on the bench to try and be the game changers for them? But I just think Arsenal tactically set up really well, and I think the goals, when you're looking at them, I think they were poor defensively from Chelsea. I think their midfield got overrun, and the goals, a lot of them were left 2v1. And then the frustration for, I think you could hear it in my voice when the Caldente goal, because I'm just like, everyone's ball watching. You got, at one point, there's 5 in the back line and not one person's even got a clue of who they've got. And she just obviously just skips past them and puts them in the back of the net. But defensively from Chelsea, I felt it was poor in that sense. And I also felt like with Chelsea, they sort of relied on individuals to sort of win them the game. I think when Lauren James comes on, I think people expecting Lauren James just to get the ball, beat every player, and then put the ball top corner. And, you know, they did look more dangerous, I think, when James come on. But your chance, you're looking at Cuthbert's chance, if she puts that away. But I still felt as well that I was still nervous. I felt that Chelsea could have got a goal, and I felt if Chelsea would have got a goal, I think Arsenal would have ended up me either losing the game or drawing it. That's how I felt with the way that the last 10 or 15 minutes finished. But I think on another day, if Cuthbert puts that goal in, then I think Chelsea have the upper hand. But for whatever reason, Chelsea just couldn't find the back of the net.
Yeah, Arsenal's bench was really light. It was basically Pullover, Holmberg and some kids.
Please respect World Cup winner Laia Kadina.
Sorry, disrespectful. But one of the things I want to pick up on, because I think going into this, we knew that the first 20 minutes were going to be hectic and frantic because both teams like to start fast and try and score early. And it did really play out like that. The first 20 minutes, it was sort of end to end. Arsenal, I think, created the better chances in the first half of the first half, and then Chelsea sort of got back into it. And there were a lot of moments in transition where both teams looked a bit like they were struggling. And then when the first half ended 0-0, I thought, do you know what? I think this could end 0-0. I wasn't quite sure if one team had enough, especially given what we'd seen from Arsenal in both those games against Manchester United. The way that they'd had tons of shots, but a lot of them were just sort of like speculative efforts from outside the box. In that first half, they did cause a few problems for Hannah Hampton. They did make her have to make some decent saves, but I just wasn't quite sure which way it was going to go. But it was that period early in the second half where Arsenal caught out Chelsea. And for me, once that first goal went in, I certainly felt like Arsenal smelt blood a little bit, and I worried about if Chelsea were going to have a chance to get back into the game, even though, like you said, Jill, they created plenty in that last sort of half an hour where you thought, okay, if they get one goal, maybe it'll swing. It's like their heads dropped in a way that I haven't necessarily seen that often from this Chelsea side. Or I felt like I was watching a team who knew that they weren't going to rescue this game as well. And just before the second goal went in, Bonpastor already had Walsh and James ready to go. And of course, she makes those substitutions. And even then, I just thought, I don't know if there's a way for them to get back into this game. I don't know how you felt, Jessy.
I think my concern with Arsenal scoring first was that it would force Chelsea to go for it, and that the way Arsenal was set up with Blackstenius was that there would then be more space for her to run into behind the Chelsea defence. And I wasn't surprised when Arsenal scored again, because it felt like Chelsea being forced to go for it meant they lost some of the control. I did think they had points towards the end of the first half anyway, but the second goal is, as Gilly just said, like that is just a failure of everyone on the pitch in terms of leaving Mariona unmarked, you know. And I think especially in an Arsenal team where, say, obviously Olivia Smith wasn't available, Arsenal have a lot of good players, but you feel like Mariona is the one who you're like, if you're going to keep an eye on one of them, that's the one I'd keep an eye on. So I think that's like very frustrating from a Chelsea point of view. I was generally surprised by how passive Chelsea were. I thought especially in the first half, they kind of sat in this mid-block and they were happy to let Arsenal have the ball. I don't know whether that was because they were worried about the midfield, but then it was interesting afterwards that Bompastor kind of implied that Chelsea weren't as intense as she wanted them to be. But clearly the way they'd been set up to press wasn't to do a high press. Or something had gone terribly wrong if that was the case. So I found that a bit of a bizarre.
Normally we're used to
normally
them
Chelsea do press high for the first 15 minutes. Yeah. So I don't. Maybe that was just a failure of communication or the players like freaking out on the pitch. But I was kind of surprised that was her explanation after the match. On the contrary, I thought Arsenal's press was really, really good, and I think, you know, if I was going to sort of like put where I would put credit towards Arsenal, it would be in that. I thought it was important both for them in turning over the ball, but also in terms of Chelsea really struggling to play out, especially without Walsh in that sort of first 50-55 minutes. I guess in hindsight, there's like, oh, well, you know, should she have risked Walsh from the start? I think that's just one of those questions where it's like, you're so biased by what you know the result is, like, as opposed to being able to answer that one kind of truthfully. But I do think the midfield obviously didn't really work right and played in the 10. I wonder if a Captain Nusken Cuthbert midfield would have been better, but equally I can see why you go with Wrighton in terms of, not in terms of creativity, just in terms of being a senior player who you think might, you know, be able to do your instructions better. And Cuthbert, Captain and Nusken does have kind of chaos heads written over it as well. So, and
we saw complete chaos in the League Cup semi-final against City with that very trio.
Well, exactly. So I do think, you know, not having Walsh there was a tough one. I mean, I think to a certain extent you can maybe ask questions. I know they got a very good fee for her, but Chelsea sold their other DM in January to Aston Villa. Would OJF have started this game? I don't think so, but Chelsea don't have that natural player at the moment with Walsh, if Walsh is out. And I do think that like potentially is like a bit of an issue there. But what I will say is, after looking a bit ropey for the first 20 minutes, I thought Chelsea adjusted well in terms of starting to just play it long to Alyssa Thompson, using her pace. She was getting in behind the Arsenal defence a lot. Chelsea had a lot of set pieces. I think on another day, one of those goes in the same way. Against the City game, they didn't look amazing, but they score from a set piece. And, you know, that is something which I think Chelsea are pretty good at. And the game changes. So I think generally my feeling is with this game is as soon as you start seeing these big macro level conclusions made, it's just the worst game to base it off of, because it's always tighter than people make it out that it was. And it always just takes on a life of its own. And I kind of felt like that was true on Saturday. And I agree with Juliet. I thought if Cuthbert scores that, I thought if Chelsea could get a goal before 70 minutes, and I think the Cuthbert chance is around 70 minutes, I thought it'd be like the game at the Emirates, but the other way around. You know, like the game at the Emirates was Arsenal managed to get that equaliser, and then suddenly like they're all over Chelsea and they could have won it. And I thought that even though Chelsea were 2 goals down, it felt like if they got that goal and like the crowd really got up, that Arsenal would maybe have like cracked a little bit. And they missed some cracking chances in the process of it. So, but again, that's also been a bit of the story of Chelsea's season. They've not been particularly clinical. I think Fotmob had them down as missing 5 big chances across the game. That's to take nothing away from Arsenal. I think obviously as well, some of those big chances came from the fact Arsenal had a 2-goal lead and they were willing to defend it. You know, they deserved to be in that position. So of course the stats then start to skew in favour of Chelsea because everything's with Chelsea. But I do think it was a game where momentum swung far more than a 2-0 Arsenal win makes it look.
Yeah, there was the game was really split into these sort of like 15-20 minute chunks where one team was in the ascendancy creating, one team was trying to get back control. I also think it's really interesting to think about the matchup coming in where you've got Arsenal, this one team that can't score, and then Chelsea, the team that's very chaotic defensively at the moment. And that was always going to be a really interesting matchup, like who was going to get their house in order first. And unfortunately, from a Chelsea perspective, they didn't get that together. But Gilly, one of the things I thought was very interesting from Renee Slegers in the post-match is one of the first answers she gave. I can't remember who asked the question, but you know, someone asked a question about like how happy were you with the players that they showed up for this game? And she said, when the moment is there and it has to happen, this team always delivers. And I very much saw that comment in two very different ways. Is she's obviously praising her team for showing up in this big game. But for me, I also think she's making a telling point of you can't just show up when you fancy it in a derby, when you want to win over your rivals. We have to see that consistency. And we obviously, Sleggers oversaw this team on that incredible run to the Champions League. And every single game, they showed up and they delivered when it mattered most. And I do think Sleggers was doing a little... You don't think so?
No, I think maybe it was a dig. I just think it's such a meaningless comment from her. They'd literally lost a cup semi-final 4 days before. You just reeled out for how long it'd been since they'd beaten Chelsea. I'm like, I get what she's saying because everyone goes to the Champions League and the Real Madrid, the Lyon second legs, not the first legs, which also would have mattered, and the final. But I'm just like, it's not true that your team always shows up and delivers when it matters most.
So that's what I'm saying. That's why I think she's saying it as a bit of a subtle dig.
No, I don't. I think it was like, no, I read it as being like, we show up, and I was just like, this is...
No, the way that she said it, I read it as a bit more of a telling nod of, I wish we could see this more, essentially. And I do think it was then interesting to have that kind of up against Katie McCabe in the BBC post-match, who was very much saying, you know, like, this is all about bragging rights, we've got bragging rights. And again, I think when you take those two comments in isolation, for me, I reflect on it and say, okay, but you still need to make sure you win something from this season, because if you end this campaign without anything, you can't just have we beat Chelsea in the league as the defining moment. And personally, I took that as a bit of a wink, wink, nudge, nudge from Sleggers, but, you know, maybe that's just me, but maybe I'm so shady that I just want to see the shade all the time. Jill, what do you think?
My argument would be, well, surely every game should matter, no?
Like, no, that's what I mean.
Yeah, like as in, to you in the semi-final midweek, and you only really turn up in that game the last 10 minutes when it seemed to sort of click in your head of, oh, do you know what? We actually need to score a goal to even get it, like, obviously to progress further. And it's just like, that's what frustrates me with Arsenal, is that they're so lapsed sometimes in how they play, and there's not really like, there's that, like, as in, there's no plan B with them sometimes. I feel like they for me play better when they're able to catch a team, when they're able to counter. When a team's sitting in defensively, like United did midweek, it's like they don't know how to break a team down, and it's like they don't know what the solution is. But there was a stat that come up in the game, and it was like their last 5 games, I think, against the top 3, they'd like drawn 4 and lost 1 or something. Like they hadn't won, and it's like that's when it matters most. That's when it's the games against City and it's the games against Chelsea, really, or you can include Man United in that in regards to like the top 4, whatever. But those are the games that matter the most, of when you're going to turn up, because obviously to win a league, you've obviously got to be the best over the course of the season. But when you're looking at the other two, City and Chelsea, for me, I would favour them to get results in those games against each other than Arsenal. I feel like when it comes to it, like you're talking, yeah, like bragging rights, but it's just frustrating, I think, from a former player for Arsenal. We've seen what Arsenal have done over the years, to just be this team now where the inconsistency with it, where it's sort of a bit like, what Arsenal are you going to turn up on a day?
This is their first win against any of the top 4 sides all season, which I do think, you know, when we were talking about that 0-0 at the Emirates against Manchester United, that is, you know, probably one of their most disappointing results of the season so far, because you, just like you said, Jill, you have to, if you're going to have any chance at competing for the title, be winning those games against the rest of the top 4. But I do think the personality of this team, it's not necessarily surprising that they do get more up for it in those big moments, but you can't just save it for those games. You have to be delivering on a consistent basis. And I personally thought Sleggers was subtly having a dig, but maybe that's just me. Jessy, there are so many big games on the horizon, not just for Arsenal. They've obviously got a huge game against City coming up.
I think they said they've got a huge game. Arsenal have a huge game against AS FAR coming up.
Well, they've got the Champions Cup this week, but they've also got Champions League playoff coming up against Leuven, who think they have a very good chance at progressing. And then a quarter-final against Chelsea, 2 legs on the horizon. And then for Chelsea, You've got a big game against City this coming Sunday.
Well, I mean, is it a big game anymore? I think in some ways, for Chelsea, blessing in disguise is the wrong word, but I think even if Chelsea had won yesterday, it would still feel like a big ask to be chasing this title. Part of me wonders is it really shifts the pressure in a way Chelsea haven't experienced at all over the past 5 years or so, obviously, because they've always been in the title race and they've always gone on to win. But you're now so far back. Does it at least put you in a position where you're like, okay, I'm not saying you're going to throw the game, but you go into City next week with a totally different mentality now than if they'd won on Saturday. And it puts the pressure on, say, with the Champions League.
Are you concerned about how they manage that Champions League pressure? Because there's always pressure in the Champions League because everyone talks it up.
Yeah.
But are you worried about how they handle that now?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I think it's hard because on the one hand, yes, everyone always talks up Chelsea in the Champions League, but I don't know whether for the players it will feel different that's, the main thing they're focusing on now. I do think it does, though, potentially, change the way you approach games. And I think even though the pressure will be higher, I think the mental strain of going into every league game, the league games in between, say, your Champions League quarterfinals, and feeling like you have to still play at 100 there because you can't drop points there because everything's so tight. That goes when you're, 9 points behind. They could be 12 points behind by the end of next week. So the flip side is, of course, you probably want to feel like you can beat teams like City if you're going to have a good run in the Champions League. So, there are a lot of different ways of cooking it. I do wonder if there is something in at least being so... Like, if you're going to take a silver lining from it, you're like, well, at least you can just really, really focus on one competition.
You don't want to drop too many points in the league, though, because
and also
and Arsenal
they're fighting for Champions League qualification. Yeah, exactly. And that's also the problem with the loss on Saturday is they had a nice little buffer with Arsenal. Even if they drew, they still had that sort of 4-point gap, and now it's 1 point, and that kind of throws you back into it. I mean, Arsenal and United obviously also have Champions League. So, it's not like, everyone's kind of in that position of having lots of big games. So I think we'll see all three of those teams drop more points as the season goes on.
Jill, quickly before we wrap this up, do you see this as a potential turning point in Arsenal's season?
I think it is a big result for them. For Renee, I think she set up really well tactically, and maybe it's that little bit as well where it's a bit like when we do the game plan, we can get the results from it. And I also think it's quite good that they done it without Olivia Smith. Because I think, like a bit like when Liverpool had her, it was a bit like, just give it to her, and you rely so much on her at such a young age. So I think it is a huge game, I think, for Beth Mead to do it as well, and to start, and obviously to get a goal and an assist, but also to show that we don't need to be a one-man band as such. You know what I mean? Like, or rely on Olivia Smith. We have got other players in there that can step up and do the business. But I think they need to kick on from this result now, and obviously they've got big few games coming up.
Well, let's talk about the team that is at the top of the table, Manchester City, next. So City beating London City 2-1 on Sunday, which means Manchester City are now 9 points clear at the top of the WSL table. I mean, the title race is kind of over, isn't it, guys? It's City's now to completely stuff up.
Yeah, I mean, I think as soon as Chelsea lost, it felt like it was going to be it was like pretty much done. I know, obviously, at points yesterday, it looked like maybe City were also going to drop points, but I even think then it's a bit like the Premier League. You can see Arsenal dropping points, but you just still feel like there's no way the teams below the Arsenal men's team are going to drop points on a slower basis than Arsenal are, even as it's happening. And I felt like that with City, even if they'd drawn against London City Lionesses yesterday, that there's just no way other teams don't carry on dropping points too. Obviously, as it is, Bunny Shaw pops up and gets the winner, as she has on a couple of occasions, coming up big, especially in later moments in games than this season. But yeah, they're in a really, really strong position. I know yesterday was maybe a more even game than some of the ones they've had recently, even if their results they've had tight results, but I think performances that have shown the gap between them and the team they're playing. Obviously a little bit less of that yesterday. But if you're in City's position, like, Saturday's result is exactly what you want. Like, you want the teams below you to be, like, taking points off each other. So you want the lower Palace team to take the points off the team who were, like, closer, even though Chelsea was still pretty far away. And yeah, and I think it will make them feel relaxed. I think the fact they've got no Champions League as well is a nice position to be in. It allows them just to focus on the league and the FA Cup. I mean, maybe they'll feel extra disappointed about the Subway Cup today and, you know, being able to go after a domestic treble, especially given their performance midweek. But I mean, for City, I think it's been so long for them. You just want to, like, laser in and focus on winning the league.
That's what I think. I think it was a big result for them to get over the line in quite a high pressure situation, in that London City Lionesses played really well, had a lot of good chances, and the game could have swung out of City's hands a little bit. So to get that late goal off the back of a disappointing midweek result where they were the better side, had tons of chances that they missed, you felt like they just needed this to kind of ease the internal pressure a little bit, to kind of prove again that, you know, we can make sure that we tick off these games and get over the line. And that gap will just be such a nice bit of breathing space for City, Jill. And they did, you know, in the first half especially, there was a moment where they could have probably kicked on a bit after Carolyn got the first. But this is such a good way for them also to go into that Chelsea game at the weekend and feel like, well, the pressure's a little bit less off. Like, if they dropped points and Chelsea had won, you felt like they would have, with the wanted there at the Etihad, you know, maybe it would have got to them. But now it feels like it's kind of, you know, the first step of what could be, you know, finally their first title since 2016.
Yeah, and I think a couple of years ago when City were in the position where they was leading, I think these were the games, I think they drew against Brighton, I remember covering it, whereas they would have dropped points when they was in that leading position. So, and I would be interested to see if it was the other way around, whether London City and Man City would have played on a Saturday and Chelsea, and that was on a Sunday, whether that have had a different sort of impact as well, because players will say, they'll talk professional, wouldn't they? They'll say, we don't look at other scores or we don't affected by it. You are, like 100% you are.
Question, because I know you are a rare women's football fan where you don't watch any men's football. You are always clued into just women's football, right? So talk to me. If you were playing on the Sunday, would you have been watching the Saturday game?
Yeah, I would have watched it. Even being when I was playing, I still would have watched it, because I'm just a very general, like, I like watching women's football anyway. So even when I was playing, I would still, if there was games on, we'd be at training a lot of the time on Saturdays, you know, and obviously they used to have on Sky when it was at the 12 o'clock kickoff on a Saturday, like, we'd have it on and we'd be sitting there watching. So I would have watched it, but when people say, like, you don't think about it or the pressures, like, I know, well, maybe it's just me, but I would have gone into that game against London City thinking, if we win today, we're going to go 9. And I think then, as the game went on, when I put it on and it was 1-1, and I was like, I felt a part of me was like, is this just typical City of before, where you have your chance to even stretch further and then you're drawing? No disrespect to London City, because they've obviously learnt a lot from their previous game against Man City as well, on how to deal with them. But it's like, looking on the clock, and it was at 85 minutes and it was like still 1-1. I thought, this is going to be not a slip up, but it's a great opportunity for City to pull themselves further away from Chelsea. And then I think this is just where the mentality is at a little bit of a shift from City, where the fact that they do manage to get the winner. So yeah, it's obviously going to be exciting coming into this obviously later stage of the season. But yeah, it's obviously a great chance for them to move further away from the pack below.
Yeah, and it was a bit tense. I mean, Izzy Goodwin hit the bar. Yamashita made another really good save from a Goodwin shot. And Freya Godfrey, brilliant goal for London City's equaliser. I mean, she's obviously having an unbelievable season. And also, it was a star-studded stand to create more hype around this fixture. So we had Alexia Putellas, Aitana Bonmati, Mariana Caldente, Ellie Carpenter, Alyssa Thompson, Beth Mead. Have I missed anyone? I think that was the lineup. You've obviously got some players who are in relationships with some of the players playing, so that kind of makes sense why they were there. We're still, jury's out on why Aitana and Alexia were in Bromley. We'll never know. So yeah, it kind of, the game took on a bit, a bit more of this kind of VIP treatment.
To know if Alexia went to the Glade shopping centre. I just need someone to tell me.
Well, is it good? Would you recommend?
Yeah, I think the Glades is good. Do you go to the Glades?
Yeah, I've been there. I used to go there a lot when I was younger.
Yeah,
but
I always used to hang
one.
out there when I was
Okay,
young.
well, Alexia, let us know if you did. And then I know Aitana was doing some Q&As
She
on
was
her
coming
Instagram.
out as heterosexual.
She was doing some Q&As on her Instagram late at night, which was interesting. Some interesting questions she decided to reply to, but, engage with your fans.
I'm glad she's doing inclusion for the heterosexual community in women's football. That's important.
So, yeah, massive result for City. Now all eyes are on that game on Sunday. That's what happened at the top of the table, but there was lots of interesting results at the bottom of the table. I want to start with Liverpool beating Tottenham 2-0. A very bad result for Spurs and a hell of a result for Liverpool, and they desperately needed it. It's their first win of the season. Jill, 2 stoppage time goals from substitute Mia Enderby. She came on in the 81st minute, scored at like 94 and 95 or something. First goal was a little bit scrappy, but she reacts well. Second goal is brilliant. She nicks the ball. Great finish. And I think so much of this result for Liverpool is down to their January window. Like, I just think I know we criticise them a lot for lack of investment or lack of focus in this team, but they have pulled out all the stops for this January window. And Mia Enderby's a young player who has shown her incredible talent, and I'm glad she got those 2 goals to show for it. But in terms of the team that's being built around it, someone who I really like the look of that they've added in January, Aurelie Schleag, who, terrible pronunciation probably, but come from Freiburg this window, kind of great number 9, can hold up the ball, was causing Spurs all sorts of problems in that first half. I just really like what they've done here, and I think this result is a sign of I think they might start to build something and pull away from the rest of this shaky pack.
Yeah, and I think Falcon goal as well is huge for them, because I think obviously they've had Rachel Laws out for majority of this season, and then she brings that experience, to tighten up the back as well. She made a great couple of saves. In regards to Mia Enderby's goals, I've got a question on Tottenham defending though, because obviously that is why I was a defender, and naturally I get really frustrated with it because it's basics, and I see it a few weeks ago when I covered them against Manchester United, how they had the 3-goal lead and they let it slip. It's just basic defensive errors where Shimizu's on the ball in the midfield. Tottenham are so slow in getting up to close the line. But as you can see, Shimizu's lining up to play the ball over the top. Tottenham defenders are still running in the direction to her. You can see what you're doing, what you want to do. And it's then one ball over the top for Jenna Clark. You got Mia Enderby, who, it's a decent ball in from Clark, but Mia Enderby gets in between 2 centre-backs, which should never have happened anyway, and then gets the finish. And then, obviously, her second goal with Simonon does the Stevie G slip, didn't she? And she goes through, but she still has to put the ball away. And I think you see, obviously, Gareth Taylor afterwards. There was this, just seemed like it was a big relief for all the players, for all the staff. And it's hard, I think, for a manager who's, we talk about the off-field stuff with Liverpool this year anyway, but a manager who's come from City, and there's a lot of talk about Gareth Taylor in former players and players who've worked under him who they don't necessarily keen on him, or they don't agree with how he is on and off the field, or he's the way he sets up. But you've got a guy who's come from Manchester City who their expectations of their standards of their team are up here, and you, in regards to then coming to Liverpool, who there's questions in regards to the investment side of it, like where do they really want Liverpool women to be, and he was got a style of play that I think at the start the players weren't good enough to play that style of play, or didn't suit or fit it. Whereas I feel now you've been giving him that time to, I know people will call him for his head and for him to be sacked, but obviously they've had a decent January window. And I think if you're looking at other teams in there, in and around that, they probably look like they've got the best depth and, in regards to creating chances and being able to get results, hopefully for them now. I think this is huge for them, their first win, but hopefully for them now they can really kick on and start to pull away.
Yeah, massive win as well for West Ham. They beat Leicester City 2-1. Rita Guarino's first win as West Ham boss in the league. I think they won the FA Cup, didn't they? Leicester look bad, but
Alicia Lehmann.
But Alicia Lehmann's going to save them, guys.
Back.
Yes, apparently she was so good at Lake Como or whatever they're called that they had to recruit her from Leicester City. I mean, I can't even bother to talk about that. But it's getting very interesting down there, Jessy, because Everton had a bad defeat to Brighton on the Friday night, lost 1-0, lots of boos at Goodison Park, and because Liverpool and West Ham both won, and they kind of cancel each other out in that sense, but they are right behind Everton, and at the moment now I'm starting to think, I'm still not sure about West Ham, but in terms of results, momentum, Leicester and Everton could be the teams that really get dragged into it.
Yeah, I think with the Liverpool win, that feels like a result that has kind of been coming. I think if you've looked at Liverpool's performances, it's felt like for whatever reason they've just not necessarily been able to get the win over the line. And I wonder if now the confidence that comes from that on top of the January recruitment, you feel like maybe they will be able to pull themselves out of that kind of bottom. I mean, to what extent it matters is what makes it a little bit hard, because I think we saw, even with that FA Cup game, how probably I think any of these WSL teams will still have the edge over that third place championship team. But we've seen, WSL2, we've seen the WSL2 teams, there's a lot of recruitment going on down there, even below that sort of top set. Obviously Charlton and Birmingham are like kind of up there, but you've got Bristol City obviously bringing in players like Katie Robinson. Newcastle continue to make moves even though they're a bit further down the table. So I guess there is a potential that in this one-off game something crazy could happen.
As well, Bristol City, with their new ownership, they are going to be desperate to try, if they're in that position in that third place, to try and win that game. And I do think the two teams I could probably see losing the playoff, Leicester City and West Ham, probably.
Yeah, I mean, I think it will be interesting. I do think with all of these teams, Leicester are just, they annoy me. West Ham, I still feel like, even though they can be quite chaotic, you've still got that kind of strange core of like Asai, Ueki, who they can be really, really annoying a lot of weeks, but they can still have their moment. Obviously, Zeldogs there, not involved yesterday, but excited to see what Katie Zellum can bring to
I'm
Parrot
happy
and Blue.
for her. She got freed. She was locked in the
and reunited with her
prison.
Juve winning manager.
Yeah.
So, I think they still feel like a team who, as much as they can be a bit annoying, they sometimes find something. And Everton equally, like, I feel like on Friday night, the Sky pundits were being a little bit harsh on what they expected Everton to be able to achieve with the squad they've got. Kelly Gargo's obviously had this bit of this transfer saga, which, isn't, I think it's perfectly reasonable for Everton to say there's a 500k release clause. I don't think that's eye-watering modern standards. It's too much to pay for Kelly Gargo, but if you're PSG and you're offering 50k or whatever it was, that's bonkers.
That is so funny.
But, she's obviously not been available for injury, and I think that's the reality with these teams towards the bottom of the table. You get one or two luxury players. If you lose them, it puts you in a really tough position. And you saw that in the game against Brighton, that, you've got Tony Payne there, and she is making these runs in behind, and 1 every 5 is onside. And then she was putting really good balls in, but there was no one there. And, that kind of comes, I think, from not really being able to have that proper recognised 9. So I can understand why they're boos at Goodison, and they've not won at home there all season, and obviously it's been a really big deal for them to move to that ground, and it's frustrating because there's been a lot of chat about attendances post Euros, but Everton have been this exciting success story of, if you move your games from being in a park to being in a football ground, more people will go to them. It's rocket science. But you want for that the club, I think, to be able to have that, but I do. Yeah, it's kind of frustrating.
I tell you, if I was at Goodison Park, I would be booing very loudly. People know how I feel about Brian Sorensen on this podcast. I've said it for probably about 3 years
Can
now.
I just say, we were in the Chelsea Arsenal presser and Flo had her like notes up and I glanced over at Flo's screen. She was notes for counterpressed and the first line just said, Brian Sorensen must be stopped.
I don't remember typing that. I know what I had done is I'd copied in Megan Fringer's tweet about the booze at Goodison, and I must have written underneath that. Right. I'm sorry, but in true Scooby-Doo fashion, he cannot keep getting away with this. Is that Scooby-Doo?
Yeah, and this is so weird because Honor and I were talking the other day about who would be who for if Counterpressed and Screamers became Scooby-Doo.
Who would be
Maybe
who?
It was because I'd told her about the Brian Sorensen must not.
Honestly.
We thought you'd be Fred, by the way, if you're wondering.
Ooh, I don't know how I feel about that. We'll discuss it afterwards. Yeah, I can't deal with it. You know, for season upon season now, we've seen them play a style of play that they cannot deliver with the squad that they have. And look, in this game on Friday night, it was a little bit different because they actually did probably create enough to get a goal, but they're so poor defensively. I mean, I was having a look. They have conceded the second highest amount of shots on target of any team in the WSL, just behind Leicester City. They've got the third fewest shots on target per 90. They don't create a lot. They don't defend well. There's been decent-ish recruitment. I agree with you, Jessy, that squad's still not great, but in the summer they did actually kind of bring in some new players. The quality is very varied. But I think it's this stubbornness of wanting to play a certain way and watching players just look quite miserable, trying to, like, failing every time at it. And I do think there's a bit of a disconnect, really, with some off-the-pitch energy around Everton with putting them in Goodison and things like that. And that doesn't really marry up with probably the hierarchy about the resources that are needed on the on-pitch side of things. And that's why I think with Sorensen, they just think, oh, it's easy, just kind of renew it again, just carry on. But I do think the lack of ambition around it, and there's just been no progress, just standing still the whole time. And there is no point in having all this great momentum with the Goodison move and the fact that you're getting great numbers in there despite the team being really bad. You need to build on that momentum and deliver something. And I feel like there's good energy around the club in general now, with the men's team not being on the worst path given the chaos that they've had in recent years. I want to see more energy. And we know that, you know, yes, we're only talking about Liverpool in the space of a couple of weeks, but we know how quickly these things can change when you do invest and you get the right personnel in as well. And I just feel like the Sorensen Everton thing is like the biggest example of just like the worst coasting in the world. It reminds me to an extent of what Skinner became under West Ham, right? It's just like, oh, well, it's easy. We're not going to get relegated. We'll just crack on with it. I think you just got to make a change to take you in a different direction. I don't know. What do you think, Joe?
I think there's going to be a point, though, isn't there, really, when money's being put into a team and they're getting all this where... Well, you'd like to think there's going to be a point where people go, well, hold on a minute, we're putting this money in, we've obviously got you playing at Goodison, where's the results that come with it? And I do think sometimes, when I was playing, I was always really worried about change, especially like mid-season, more so from a personal point of view, because you always think, well, what about if a manager comes in and don't rate you and don't want to play, especially when you're like settled at a club. But sometimes you can just see teams that are desperate for a bit of that, and you can shake up players all you want, but if you're talking about style of play, and I mean, for me, Everton defensively, like the amount of goals they give up just from them trying to play out from the back, when does a manager not be stubborn in that sense and go, do you know what, I'm trying to play a certain way, it's not happening because my players just aren't good enough to do that, or it don't suit them players. When does that manager put sort of their ego in that side and go, right, what's best for the team? So I think sooner or later it's got to happen there, because like you're saying, especially when money's coming in, they're going to want results.
Yeah. Well, let's wrap it there for WSL. Of course, this week it is the debut of the FIFA Champions Cup. All kicks off on Wednesday. We've got Gotham playing Corinthians early in the day, and then we've got Arsenal ASFAR in the evening 6 p.m. slot.
6 p.m, so there will be time to get from that game, presuming there's no penalties, I guess, for extra time, to the men's pub to watch men's Champions League final day.
Very true. And I think there's some fun events. I'm doing an event on Wednesday. Baller FC are doing a fun kind of pub takeover as well for anyone that is doing the hardcore that are doing the double header.
Yeah.
Which is, you go into any...
Well,
you're going to be
I've got
working.
an email to say, and first of all, there's got to be some sort of technical glitch there in regards to timings, because it ain't even half term. Like, as in, for like a game to kick off at 12:30 or whatever it is on a Wednesday. So, no, unfortunately, some of us do.
Well, I do know that a lot of schools in West London have been invited to attend. So I do think, even though it's not half term,
they're getting kids to bunk off school.
The kids are getting some time off school, which is great. I'm all for it.
Yeah.
Take the kids out of school, bring them to football.
Corinthians Gotham, I'm almost more excited for.
I'm really excited for that.
Vibey.
I think it'll be vibey. I'm really excited because, Brazilian football is so huge. I do think there's actually quite a fun Corinthians international fan base that could turn up for this game. They're in the kind of early, setup of building this women's football fan base, and the Brazilians in the internet are just so wild. Like, they have so many social media followers. Like, it's just bonkers. So I'm excited to see how that kind of translates. And there's actually quite a lot of money to be won. So people
There's more money to be won than winning the bloody Champions League.
So people should be turning up.
It's like 2 million. You
Yeah,
can't enter on your own, Jill, I'm afraid.
Oh, damn it.
Imagine if we just try and
find
a team.
We're like, we've won the Podcasters Cup, and so we're also going to play.
Maybe we can persuade the people behind World Sevens to create a media World Sevens version where we can win £1 million.
Yeah.
I'd love that.
But we would really need to aggressively recruit some more ex-pros, and we would just not play. Because I want that money.
Yeah, I was going to say, I think we're quite good in terms of ex-pro representation compared to some other
and we have
places, but the BBC and
would
Sky,
be worried.
They would be the worry.
We have good also like sideline gaffer energy. Like we could have the clipboard and then we'll just get the...
I can run around a bit, that's fine.
Okay, well, we'll need to make sure we stack our team well,
I'd love that.
Because I'm worried about what Farrah Williams, Ellen White could do to our media
that's
five-side team. I'm not gonna lie.
Can we get Stefan Wrighty?
Okay,
can we have a ringer?
Wrighty's ankles and knees
he'd be a good sideline gaffer.
Yeah, but I'm sure Steph would play. But I'm not sure about Wrighty's body. I'd be worried.
Fair.
But we'd need all the help we can get. But if there was, oh my God. I mean, I suppose it's just like, well, Baller League, they're all like ex-pro. They're sort of semi-pro lads. But we need that version of the Media World Sevens. Okay, well, I'll see you on Wednesday at Champions Cup, JPH. Jill, enjoy your week. Sorry you can't make it to Champions Cup. And of course, we'll be back on Thursday talking about Wednesday's Champions Cup. We'll see you then.